Here we are, another wonderful afternoon, but unfortunately not for most of people in the Middle East. Look, today I'm going to talk about how Benny and the gang fooled the Washington buffoon. That's right, how Benny and the gang fooled the Washington buffoon. The state of Israel, since its illegal creation, has attempted to dominate affairs in the Middle East with the ultimate intention of creating a greater Israel with vassal states. It's quite simple. The carnage they inflicted in Gaza, the destruction of what's left of the West Bank, highlights their program is to ensure that a Palestinian nation will never be created. That's its ultimate goal. Now, the United States of America has a long history of intervention. The United States and Israeli bombing of Iran is not writing a new page in the United States foreign policy. The United States has 897 foreign bases outside its national borders. Russia has approximately 25, and the other mega power, China, has one in Djibouti. So we can see that since the collapse of the communist empire, the United States policy in terms of determining the affairs of the sovereign nation states around it has not changed. What is different this time is the degree of force that's been used, because this time they're not extracting some two-bit South American president from office. They are taking on a significant middle power in the Middle East. Irrespective of what you think about the Iranian regime, and I've always felt it was nothing more than a theocracy, an authoritarian theocracy, the fact is, under so-called international law, not that international law exists, that countries have a right to exist, irrespective of what goes on in its borders. Look at the situation in Myanmar, one of our neighbours, Burma. Now, the Myanmar people have been under occupation by an authoritarian military dictatorship for over 6 decades. And when we reached the situation where a democratically elected government with an overwhelming majority was removed from power by force, the West sat on its laurels. Now, the Myanmar government currently is being bankrolled by the Chinese government. What has occurred in Myanmar, which has descended into civil war, is an extremely serious situation. But we see no discussion about the reintroduction of a democratically elected government in Myanmar. It's all about allowing the forces in that country to determine their own future. So what's critical about Iran? How was the buffoon in Washington fooled into supporting the Israeli program for expansion in the Middle East? Now, people talk about democratic change in Iran. Let's not forget, the Middle East, apart from Lebanon and Israel is mainly populated by feudal monarchies. All the countries which support the United States and which have allowed military bases to be built on its lands, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Bahrain, whether it's United Arab Emirates, are feudal monarchies. Nobody talks about regime change in Bahrain or Saudi Arabia, despite their oppressive laws, despite the way they have treated Shia Muslims, their own citizens. But everybody talks about democratic change, parliamentary democracy I should say, in Iran. Now, historically, it is very difficult to dislodge a government that's entrenched in power, irrespective of the opposition to that government in that country, by bombing it into submission. When Kissinger and Nixon attempted to force the North Vietnamese back to the negotiation table through bombing Cambodia, Laos, deforestation, carpet bombing, you name it, all it did is it hardened the attitude of the North Vietnamese, and more importantly, it hardened the attitude of the people. Because irrespective of how precise, in inverted commas, a bombing campaign is, there will be deaths and injuries among people that are not combatants. That's what we saw. Gaza was a classical example. Now, it took the Israeli authorities almost 2 years to pacify, in inverted commas, through force, Gaza. Gaza is the size of half of Sydney or Melbourne. It's a tiny little enclave, the world's biggest prison. It's different in Iran. It's a large landmass with an entrenched authoritarian regime which has many layers. It has a religious layer, is an authoritarian layer. It has various arms groups within it. It has paramilitary groups. It has the Republican Guard, the Revolutionary Republican Guard, Revolutionary Guard, and the list goes on and on. So if you think that this bombing campaign was about freeing the people of Iran from tyranny and creating an era of parliamentary democracy, think again. This campaign was engineered by the Israeli authorities, Israeli governments, who understood now was a classical, critical moment for them to be able to expand their empire and their domination of the Middle East. And that's what we are seeing. The tragedy is, the buffoon in Washington was convinced that this was the right way to go. Unlike 3 or 4, I think 5 years ago, when there was a dispute regarding the Strait of Hormuz, and we saw a peaceful resolution. The fact is, this is a war that is costing the United States of America trillions of dollars. This is a war that is depleting its armaments. This is a war which will only increase inflation and prices in the United States of America. This is a war which is being conducted by the whim of one person. That's the tragedy when we talk about the United States of America as some type of democracy. Now, the fact is that one person, not Congress, not the Senate, but one person can declare war. Interestingly, we have the same situation in Australia. It is the Prime Minister, as we saw during the Howard regime, when we were embroiled in the Iraq fiasco, that has the power to to declare war. It's the Prime Minister. Not Cabinet, not the government of the day, not the Senate, not the House of Representatives, but the Prime Minister. So the reality is, obviously this has a profound impact on the Iranian people. I think that it will not engender a popular revolution. I think what it'll do is entrench the authority of the hardliners, and we'll see many Iranians who don't support reform or the theocracy move across to the theocracy, because obviously their lives have been disrupted by this campaign. So what are the lessons for Australia? And this is the critical element that we seem to have forgotten. Australia is an island. It's a continent. It's the biggest island in the world. It is sparsely populated. There are less than 27 million people. We have United States troops, over 3,000, stationed in North Australia. Pine Gap is a fundamental component of the American war machine. That's the situation we find ourselves in 2026. It was fascinating to see that the first government that was happy to support this action taken by Israel and the United States of America was the Australian government, a Labor government, where the Prime Minister stood up and said, "We fully support this intervention in Iran." What is to stop Russia, or more importantly China, intervening in the affairs of this country? What's to stop them from bombing Parliament House in Canberra during a sitting? Obviously people will say it's the United States alliance which protects us. It's not the United States alliance which protects us. For example, did the Prime Minister realise there are 115,000 Australians in the Middle East at that particular point in time? Thousands in transit between Australia and Europe? Did the Prime Minister give any bearing to the fact that we live next to the largest Muslim country in the world, Indonesia, with over 200 million Muslims, Malaysia, which is a Muslim country? There are more Muslims in our region than there are Muslims in the Middle East. Did the Prime Minister think of any of this when he put up his hand and he said, "We fully support what's going on in Iran, the destruction, the bombing, the murder"? People talk about eliminating the leadership. How would people feel if somebody bombed Capitol Hill and killed the president? Obviously, it's a different world in 2026, not in terms of United States foreign policy. United States foreign policy has always been interventionist. Irrespective of where it happens in the world, remember the struggles in Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Congo, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Malaysia, and the list goes on and on. It's always intervened. Look at the way it treats a sovereign nation state, Cuba. If it cannot get its way through economic coercion, as we've seen in Venezuela, it will use force, and it's quite happy to use unlimited force to promote its interests. But this time is different, because it's using its unlimited force to promote the interest of the Israeli state, the Israeli government, and significant proportions of the Israeli people, at the expense of hundreds of millions. As the Spanish Prime Minister said, this type of intervention pays plays Russian roulette. That's right, it plays Russian roulette with the lives of millions of people. Who knows where this intervention will lead to? Who knows what the final death toll will be? This is an intervention which was about expanding the interests of the Israeli state and the conservatives which rule the Israeli state at the expense of millions, tens of millions in the Middle East. It's got nothing to do with democracy, it's got nothing to do with freedom. That's the reality we face in 2026. But the problem is, as we saw with the 3 Australian troops which were stationed on the nuclear submarine which sank the frigate off the coast of the Iranian frigate at the coast of Sri Lanka, killing over 80 sailors, and not sailing towards them to assist the survivors, which you don't expect, from a country that's happy to use missiles to obliterate speedboats in the Caribbean. But the fact is, we are a primary target because of our interaction with the United States government. There is no right or wrong in this situation. This is about using naked force. If you can't coerce people through the economy, crippling their economy, then you use naked force to get your own way. And that's what we saw. That's what we see with these states like Iran. We see, and Cuba, what we see is economic sanctions crippling the country, causing internal dissension, then fanning that internal dissension to create situations which assist the United States government, and in this situation the Israeli government, to continue to conduct their campaigns to enforce their power at the expense of their neighbours. This is a pivotal point in world history, and it's a pivotal point not because of a looming war, not because of an expansion of this particular conflict, but it's a pivotal point because it puts us in the crosshairs of any future disputes between China and the United States of America. Once again, we see the Australian government annoying the Chinese government by sailing through the Straits of Taiwan. For what? Basically, to serve its master, the United States of America. For a long time, people have said Australia was not independent, and it's no longer independent. Our armed forces are integrated with the armed forces of the United States of America. As we've seen with the chain of command, whether it's in Australia through Albanese or through the Buffoon in Washington in the United States of America, what we see is when the trigger is pulled, we see tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people involved in that conflict, as if blind obedience to authority is the way forward. Any men and women in the military forces in this country, Australian Defence Forces, need to understand that they are nothing more than puppets for the government of the day. If governments change, their very existence is at risk. We see this over and over and over again. So there are any lessons? Well, the lessons are clear. It's to cut the apron strings. Is to move forward with an independent foreign policy which is based on our interests in this region with our neighbours, not some force which may or may not come to our defence depending on whether it suits its current political framework.